Hello and welcome. We have a great event planned for you today with a live raptor. This event kicks off this year's Wyoming Outdoor Expo, and we're so excited to have you here today. With that said, say hello, let us know where you're from in a comment, and let's get this thing started. I'm your host, Chris Martin. I'm the digital content creator for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And today we are joined by Melissa Hill. She's the Live Raptor Program Manager at the Buffalo Bills Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming. She oversees a team of staff and volunteers and 12 Raptors, one of which will be featured today. And she presents programs to all types of groups in person and online. And we are lucky to have her here today presenting an online program with us. So in promoting this event, we asked you which bird you hope to see on the live stream today. And the responses were kind of all across the board, but the birds gaining the most number of votes were the peregrine falcon, one of the owls, or the turkey vulture. And so with that, Melissa, let's solve the mystery and figure out which bird is going to be appearing with us today on the stream.
All right, thank you so much, Chris, and thanks everybody for already tuning in to cast a vote of which bird you were hoping to see. And I'm happy to report that we actually get to share one of the birds that you did actually pick. And it's a bird that's not often appreciated enough. So as it was promoted through the Game and Fish Department, I'm going to share one of my favorite birds, not just my favorite birds, one of my favorite species of all of the animals out there in the world with you today, and actually one of my favorite individual birds that I've ever worked with in over 20 years doing that. And this is our turkey vulture, and her name is Suli. And so now we get to introduce you to this absolutely amazing bird. And although I appreciate that so many of you were hoping to get to see our peregrine falcon, I am happy that at least some of you were really excited and hoping to get to meet this bird here. And one of the reasons that I love turkey vultures so much is that they're so underappreciated. So I get why people want to learn about peregrine falcons. They're absolutely fascinating. They fly fast. They have an incredible comeback story from being nearly extinct. They're phenomenal, gorgeous, amazing birds. And owls are fascinating too. Last year we shared our saw-whet owl with you for the Outdoor Expo with our virtual program. But this is a bird that I think everybody really needs to learn about. And right now, Suli is feeling her oats. And I'm going to tell you why she's so different than birds that you've seen in programs in the past. And part of it is because it is late in the day and it is way past dinner time. So LaDon's giving her some food right now because Suli is kind of like an angry toddler who hasn't had her snack at the moment. So LaDon's sharing some food with her right now, so hopefully she can settle down and show us all the amazing things that make turkey vultures so wonderful. And if you're really in the know about raptors out there, you're probably wondering why a raptor program and a program about raptors is featuring a turkey vulture. And the reason for that is I'm happy to report that turkey vultures are now actually classified as part of the raptor group. And raptors are just one of the groups that help make up the more than 10,000 different kinds of birds that you can find on our planet today. And raptors are different from the rest of the birds that are out there. So you're probably really familiar with songbirds. You probably know a little bit about the waterfowl you might see out on the lakes or even the rivers. But raptors are going to have three main characteristics that they're going to share. And so all of the raptors, number one, they're carnivores. So they only eat meat. And in order to find their food, they're going to have fantastic eyesight. So raptors, even a bird like a turkey vulture here, can actually spot their next meal from a mile away. So they have this absolutely phenomenal vision that helps them find their next meal. On top of that, all of the raptors in the world are going to have that sharp hooked upper beak. And you can see that when you look closely here at Suli. And that's because even though they all eat meat, they don't have knives and forks or teeth to tear apart their food. So for raptors, they have to use this incredible beak as their tool. So Suli is going to show this is how she would tear apart her food. She's grabbing LaDon's glove and she is pulling and she's using that sharp beak to twist and tear. And so all of the raptors are going to have that hooked beak that they use to tear off pieces of meat that are then bite-sized. And the reason they need that is because they don't always catch prey that can be swallowed whole. So, for example, golden eagles, their favorite food is rabbits. And even though golden eagles are really big birds, they just cannot swallow a rabbit whole. So their beaks are used as a tool to be able to tear apart their meals. And then the last characteristic that all of the raptors have in common, except for the vultures, is that raptors have powerful feet and sharp talons. And the reason for that is because other than the vultures, they're hunters for the most part. And so they're going to use their powerful feet and sharp talons to catch their prey. Now, when you look at Sully's feet here, and you can see with her standing nicely on the glove, the turkey vultures don't have powerful feet. They don't have sharp talons. Sully's feet actually look very similar to those on a chicken or even a turkey. And that's because these are not hunters. So most of you are probably already aware that the vultures are scavengers. And that means that even though they're meat eaters, they find dead animals, and that's going to be their food supply. So vultures like Sully here, they're not going to kill things. So they don't need powerful feet and sharp talons to be able to grab a hold of rabbits or mice or snakes or other birds. Their feet actually need to be designed for walking because they do a lot of walking. They'll land on the ground near the carcass they want to eat, and then they'll walk over to it to make sure the coast is clear. And then they can also use those feet, and you can see how long her toes are. They help her brace while she's pulling on that carcass. So just because a turkey vulture found something that's dead doesn't mean it's actually an easy meal. One of their favorite foods is to find a big ungulate, so something like a deer or an elk or a cow that has died, and they want to eat that. But they don't have strong enough beaks to be able to get through thick hides. And once those hides are finally open, what they'll do is they'll stand on top of it, they'll spread those big old feet out, hook that sharp beak in, and then they pull really hard. And those feet help them brace so they've got a nice good footing under them so that they can pull really hard and hopefully get a really big bite of food out of there. So again, those characteristics that all the raptors are going to have, they're all going to have fantastic eyesight. They're going to have that sharp hooked upper beak, and most of them, except for the vultures, are going to have powerful feet and sharp talons. Now, vultures used to not be classified as raptors because they don't have those powerful feet and sharp talons. But luckily, the Peregrine Fund has done a lot of research and they've done a lot of promoting. And because in almost every other sense, turkey vultures are like all of those other raptors, they have officially reclassified them through a paper that puts them in that same group with hawks, eagles, falcons, owls, caracaras, those kinds of birds. So these guys happen to be one of those fantastic animals. And we're really proud that we get to have Sully here as part of our program as well. And, you know, it's not just being a raptor that makes a vulture amazing. In fact, they're kind of extra special because they are so different in some ways than a lot of the other raptors. And even though a lot of you want to see that peregrine falcon and we're amazed at their incredible hunting abilities, some of the things that aren't appreciated in the vultures are what make them so incredible. So peregrine falcons are gorgeous birds. And turkey vultures are very rarely called gorgeous. Now, Sully right now is being a clown and she's being silly because she's hungry and she's a little upset that we haven't brought all of her food out here. But these birds are actually very inquisitive and they're very intelligent. And I think they're actually very beautiful. Now, I know that not everybody agrees with me. And basically, the only reason that people can give me that these birds aren't attractive is that they're bald. And you can see as we zoom in that she's not actually entirely bald. Sully does have quite a bit of feathers, little peachy fuzz kind of stuff on the top of her head. And this is actually going to help her stay clean. So if you know that this bird is going to be eating dead things that have been sitting on the side of the road, obviously it's not really a clean meal. So turkey vultures have to find ways to keep themselves clean. And so by not having all of the feathers on the tops of their heads, they're able to get their heads into dirty places and not get feathers or get stuff stuck to the feathers on the tops of their heads. So these birds actually, because they have that bald head, will stay a lot cleaner. And that is really important for these turkey vultures. So the other thing that people say that what they really don't like about turkey vultures and vultures in general is that they're creepy animals. And, you know, creepy can kind of be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Right now, Sully's just being kind of crabby. But the creepy factor here is usually because of the behavior that people see where they circle around in the sky. And what almost all of us are taught is that they're doing that because they're waiting for something to die below them. And I hate to break it to you, but that's not actually what turkey vultures are doing. So again, turkey vultures are scavengers, so they are out there looking for animals that have already died. So she's not waiting for something to die. She doesn't have the powerful feet to finish it off. So what she does is she circles in the sky to save energy. And vultures are probably the best at soaring of any of the birds that I know, definitely of any of the birds that I have ever worked with. So Sully has actually about a 5-foot wingspan, which is basically the same width as my arms can stretch out, which is pretty impressive for a bird. And she's kind of a small turkey vulture. So if she was a big turkey vulture, she could have up to a 6-foot wingspan. Now that's basically the same size as an eagle. But the benefit for the turkey vulture is that she weighs about a fourth or a third of what a golden eagle or a bald eagle is going to weigh. So she has this huge wingspan, but this really lightweight body. And that means that she can ride up on the warm air currents called thermals and hang out in the air for hours at a time. And so what they do is they save energy by soaring rather than flapping their wings to get from point A to point B. And you will see other raptors like hawks and eagles soaring as well. And again, that's just a way for them to save energy. And that's important because if you're going to need a lot of energy to chase your prey, or if you have to cover lots and lots of area to find your prey, you really need to save energy where you can. So the turkey vultures will catch those thermals and ride them in big circles like a slow hot tornado as they gain altitude, and then they'll leave their thermal and glide and soar till they find another thermal to lift them back up. And by doing that, they can cover hundreds and hundreds of miles without really exerting any energy. And there we're showing off our wings just a little bit so you can see how big they are. Now, the other thing that's really fun about these guys, and what I love to point out too, is that they have one of the most efficient and one of the slowest wing beats of any of the birds out there. So most of you probably know that hummingbirds have the fastest wing beat of any bird, but the vultures flap really slowly. So they have these big, huge wings. They have big, huge wing beats. And what that does is it makes them really slow. So you're never going to see a turkey vulture diving at 200 miles an hour like a peregrine falcon does, but you will see them gliding gracefully through the air. And turkey vultures do a behavior where they actually kind of teeter and they rock back and forth in the air. There's that wingspan. And that's because they have such big wings and such light bodies that they kind of get tossed around in the wind. But you'll see that big V shape, and that's one of the great indicators that you know you're looking at a turkey vulture. And so once they've soared around and they've found their food, then they're going to make sure the coast is clear. So while they're circling in the sky, it's not necessarily that they're waiting for something to die below them. They may be waiting for another predator or another scavenger to clear the way, because they don't really have a lot of defenses. So they don't want to land on the ground and be attacked by a wolf or a coyote or a bald or golden eagle. So they're going to wait until they know it's safe for them to land and then be able to eat their meals. And what goes right along with what I was talking about earlier, when they're eating those meals, and Suli was showing it off a minute ago, and I'll let her show it off again here, is that she keeps that head clean because it's very bald. But turkey vultures have no problem sticking their heads inside things. And so Suli obviously knows that she has some food in this cup and she wants that food. And we're going to use this to show off just how unafraid she is to stick her head inside things. Now, right now, that's inside a cup that has her little bits of her dinner tonight, her little chunks of meat. But in the wild, this could be the rib cage of a raccoon. It might be a deer. It might be any kind of big animal out there. So she has to be brave enough to stick her head inside so that she can find the good meals. And not only is it good for her to stick her head in there because that's where the good stuff is, it's where the clean stuff is. So if you think about a deer that's been sitting on the side of the road for a couple of days in the hot sun in July, that's not something we want anything to do with. We can smell it coming for a while as we're driving down the highway. And this bird, believe it or not, actually has standards. Most people don't think that about turkey vultures, but they do. She doesn't want to eat something that's been laying out for weeks at a time. In fact, it will get too rotten for a turkey vulture. But sometimes, especially when you're hungry, that deer that's been there for a couple days, it's still good in the places where it's been in the shade, where it's a little bit cooler. So what they'll do is they'll stick their head in that carcass past the really gross stuff that's most exposed to the elements, a little deeper inside to find the cooler, less disgusting stuff. And so that's when you see those turkey vultures really needing that bald head that keeps them clean. And most people actually think that vultures are disgusting, filthy birds, but they're really not. These guys actually like to be very clean. When Suli's done eating, or if she was a wild turkey vulture, one of the first things they would do would be to go out and find a nice place to take a bath. And Suli actually loves to take baths, especially on hot days. It keeps her feathers clean. She can clean off her head if she did happen to get a little dirty. And it's going to keep her healthier as well. And so being healthy is something that a lot of people don't think about with vultures either. And I can kind of see why. If you're a turkey vulture, you're eating animals that you find, and you don't necessarily know what they died of. They may have been hit by a car. They may have died of botulism out in a field, maybe anthrax. All kinds of diseases can kill wildlife or our livestock, and the vultures have no idea. They just see a meal and they want to take advantage of that. So I can see why people would think that a bird that's going to eat these animals that die of horrible diseases are going to be kind of unhealthy or disgusting beasts. But the reality of it is, this is going to be one of the cleanest, healthiest animals in our ecosystem. In fact, these are the guys that are cleaning our ecosystems for us. So turkey vultures, believe it or not, actually have a digestive system that is perfectly designed to neutralize lots and lots of different diseases. And that's really important when your diet is eating diseased animals. And not all the scavengers can say that. In fact, very few scavengers have a digestive system that can actually handle those kinds of diseases. So if Suli found an animal out there that died of something like salmonella, botulism, anthrax, maybe even rabies, when she eats that animal, she's exposed to all of those diseases. Now, another animal could end up getting sick. And if they survive that sickness, everything that they ate is going to get digested, and that stuff's going to pass through their bodies and get back into the environment. So instead of removing it, they just kind of processed it, maybe moved it a little bit. But it's still going to be out there for other animals to be exposed to. But turkey vultures are completely different. So these guys actually have a stomach acid with a pH that's close to 0. And that's more acidic than battery acid. So that's some of the most acidic stuff on Earth. So when Suli eats an animal that has died of a disease, instead of getting sick, she's actually going to neutralize the disease and the toxins, the bacteria inside her digestive tract. It's not going to make her sick. It's not going to pass through and come out in her poop and get back in the environment. It's all going to come out cleaned. So instead of spreading disease like most people think, the vultures remove those diseases from our environments. And that's one of the things that makes these guys so incredibly important. They're cleaning up our environment, so they're our garbage men, and they're actually making it a healthier and safer place, not only for wildlife, but for us as well. So turkey vultures are really misunderstood because folks don't understand just how important of a job they actually do. And it's not just turkey vultures either. There are a lot of vultures around the world that are critical to keeping their environments clean. And right now, in a lot of areas of the world, their vulture populations are disappearing at alarming rates. And not only is it sad for those of us that love vultures, but it's dangerous for humans and wildlife that live right alongside where these birds used to be. So in India, the vultures used to end up at carcass dumps. So when your livestock would die, you would take it to this area. The vultures would come in, they would feed on those carcasses, clean them up, get rid of diseases, and the environment was then cleaner. But unfortunately, a lot of those animals were being treated for pain, things like arthritis. And when those bodies ended up at the carcass dumps and the vultures came along to clean it up, they were poisoned by that medication. So even though Suli and most of the vultures can handle all of these diseases, they can't necessarily handle all of the chemicals that we put back into the environment. And so because of just one drug that's been used, a lot of the birds, in fact, up to 99% of about 7 different species of vultures in India, Asia, Africa, they're gone. And when we see those numbers drop so significantly, we end up seeing a huge rise in the number of diseases in people because our cleanup crew isn't there. And what happened in India was the vultures were replaced by wild dogs. And unfortunately, those wild dogs were carrying rabies. And when people would come to dispose of their livestock, they would get bit by these dogs and end up getting rabies. And that's definitely not something that anybody wants to see. So with the loss of vultures, we see a huge increase in diseases spread through people and other wildlife. So vultures, no matter where they live in the world, are critically important to all of our ecosystems. And we're really lucky here in North America because we have 3 different kinds of vultures that we can see throughout the year. Turkey vultures are the most widespread, and in fact, turkey vultures are the most widespread scavenging bird in the world. So these guys are phenomenal to have around, and you can find them in the summers across all of the United States. They actually go as far north as southern Canada, and they don't mind lots of different habitats. So they don't have to have mountains or they don't have to have forests. As long as there are some dead animals for them to find, they're going to be pretty happy. And the other 2 kinds of vultures that we have here in North America are the black vulture, which you'll find mostly in the southern and eastern part of the United States. And then we also have one of the most amazing birds in the world, in my opinion, the California condor. It's the largest bird in North America. They can have up to a 9-foot wingspan. And unfortunately, that's still a very endangered species. And right now, there are about 500 California condors in the world. About half of those are in the wild. And they're found in only a few places spread across California, Arizona, and a little bit into Utah as well. So we're lucky that the turkey vultures are actually very widespread so that they can be out across most of the United States and even into Canada to help us clean up our ecosystems. And this is definitely a bird you guys want to have around. Now, one other just truly amazing fact about turkey vultures, because I can't, not mention this, is that we've got all these great adaptations and these great characteristics that make these other birds so wonderful. But turkey vultures have an adaptation that so many birds don't. In fact, not even all vultures have. And that's an incredible sense of smell. And hopefully you can see as Suli's here taking care of her feathers and preening, you can see that she has this weird bone that kind of comes down and it makes it look like she has one big nostril. And that's not quite the case. And there are some scientists that think that this nice cool bone here actually helps out with the fact that turkey vultures are one of the few birds in the world that have a great sense of smell. And if you can look closely, now she's going to try out the underside of her wing here, but if you look closely at a turkey vulture's face, you'll notice their nostrils are like ours. They go up into their nose, but that bone protects those nostrils. And that's important if you're sticking your head deep inside a carcass. You don't want your nose getting clogged with bits of meat and stuff. But there are some scientists that think that there is something about it that helps them to have such a great sense of smell. And there are only 3 vultures in the New World, so North, Central, and South America, that have that great sense of smell. It's the turkey vulture and then the greater and the lesser yellowheads that you can find down in South America. And not only do they have a good sense of smell, but it's one of the ways that turkey vultures can actually find their food. So yes, they have fantastic eyesight, like birds like eagles and falcons, but if they can't see their prey, and a lot of the times it's kind of hard to see a dead animal because it's not really moving, they can find it using their sense of smell. And the smell section of their brain is actually so big that they can pick up just a few parts of that rotting meat scent on the wind. And there are some folks that say a turkey vulture can smell a rotting carcass from as far as 5 miles away, which is absolutely phenomenal. And one of the ways that two of the ways that they tested this in turkey vultures is that they found them down in the rainforest. They buried some dead animals, hid them with some leaves, and within a day, the turkey vultures were able to find those carcasses. They couldn't see them, and the only other way they could have found them was through their sense of smell. And the other thing that's really fascinating is you probably have noticed, if you've ever smelled natural gas, that it has kind of a gross, rotting smell. So it kind of smells like a rotting animal. And that is put into our gas so that we can know when we have a gas leak. And there are some natural gas companies that have discovered leaks in their pipelines because they've spotted turkey vultures circling the area. So the vultures picked up on that rotting scent, found that specific area, and there wasn't a dead animal below, but there was a leak in the pipeline. So they can actually help us in that way as well. So if you haven't completely thought of turkey vultures as amazing, fascinating, and incredible beneficial creatures before, I hope that Suli, especially now that she's calmed down after getting some food in her stomach, feel kind of bad that we had fed her more, but she can be a little testy too. Hopefully, just by meeting Suli here, we've changed your mind about a bird that's really misunderstood, not just here in the United States, but they're misunderstood across the globe. And if you haven't changed your mind about turkey vultures, we definitely want you to throw comments and questions in that comment section. We do have a chat wrangler who has been rounding those up for us. She's going to start feeding me questions here in just a minute. So don't worry, we're going to answer as many questions as possible. So we'll definitely take care of that. But we want to make sure that everybody understands these birds and just how important they are. Because yes, every animal in the world has a purpose in nature. And for most of the raptors, their job is pest control. They get rid of things like mice and rabbits and snakes and pigeons. But for the vultures, they do the job that nobody else wants to do. They clean up the disgusting stuff in the fields, on the side of the road. It's not a job that I want to have, but I'm incredibly thankful that we have birds like Suli here to do that for us. So before I forget, because you've probably already asked 100 questions on this so far, I do want to tell you a little bit about Suli herself. And Suli, now that she's calmed down, you may have noticed through this whole program, she doesn't act like most of the birds that we would bring out during one of our presentations. And that's because she's not. And it's not just because she's a turkey vulture. Here at the Draper Museum Raptor Experience, as Chris mentioned, we do take care of 12 birds. And all of our birds live here because they have a disability that prevents them from being able to go back into the wild. And so many of our birds have had a wing break that didn't heal properly, or they've had damage to their eye that prevents them from being able to hunt successfully. But Suli is the only one of our birds that has no physical problems whatsoever. Her wings are absolutely perfect. Her vision is phenomenal. Suli is what is known as a human imprint. And what that means is she doesn't know that she's a bird. So when Suli was only 2 weeks old, she was found as an orphan. She had lost her parents. She didn't have any of her real feathers. She was just this white, fuzzy ball of vulture. And there was no way that she could take care of herself. So a rancher found her in a haystack. That's where her parents had decided to have their nest, because turkey vultures don't actually build a nest. They like to find little crevices, and that's where they lay their eggs. So they found this orphan turkey vulture chick, and they knew they couldn't take care of her, and they knew her parents weren't coming back. So they took her into a nature center, and that's where she grew up. There weren't any other turkey vultures that could be her foster parents. So instead, Suli grew up surrounded by people, and she watched people, and she learned about people, and she got to help do the laundry or maybe type some information on the computer. And so instead of learning, I'm a turkey vulture, this is what I look like, this is how I behave, she learned that she looks like us, that she's part of our family, and that she should act like people. So that means she doesn't have any survival skills whatsoever to go out into the wild again, even though physically she's perfectly fine. And I love to give the two examples that are the most dramatic of why Suli cannot go back into the wild. And as I mentioned, these guys are scavengers, so they eat dead things. And the jackpot for a turkey vulture is to find a deer that's been hit by a car. Well, the Game and Fish Department here in Cody was nice enough to bring us a deer that had been hit along the highway to help us feed our birds. And as they were carrying it in, they walked past Suli's building, and when she saw a big, huge dead deer, she almost had a heart attack. It was the scariest thing she's ever seen in her life. And if a turkey vulture is scared of a dead deer, she's never going to be able to feed herself in the wild. So that's one skill that she's severely lacking. She loves to eat venison or deer meat. She just doesn't want it to be part of a body, apparently. And then the other thing that became very obvious when Suli got to the age where it was time to be an adult and it was time for her to pick her mate, turkey vultures usually mate for life, so they pick their partner and they will actually come back to each other every summer and be partners and raise their young. So when it was time for Suli to find her lifetime partner, she didn't go looking for a turkey vulture, she looked for a person. And unfortunately for our assistant, Brandon, he's the lucky one who was chosen as Suli's favorite. So in the spring, things get a little awkward around here because when LaDawn or I walk past Suli's room, she just kind of ignores us or she tells us to go away because she's in that moody teenager kind of phase. And when Brandon walks by, all of a sudden, she's up in her window, she's found a little scrap of food that she saved, and she tries to lure him in because she wants him to be her boyfriend. And Brandon learned very quickly that you don't fall for that trick twice. So Suli has no idea that she is a vulture, that she's supposed to hang out with vultures, or how to be a vulture. So that's why she lives here with us, because we can't teach her any of those things. Suli is going to be 10 years old this summer. And in the wild, turkey vultures are pretty long-lived birds. They can live up to 20 years on average, although the surveys on these guys' lifespans aren't really easy to collect. The oldest turkey vulture that we have on record from banding studies is about 14 years old in the wild, but they can live longer than that. But living here in captivity with us, Suli could actually live into her 40s. And the reason for that is because she doesn't have to worry about starvation. She's always going to get fed, even if we feed her a little late in the day. She doesn't have to worry about diseases or parasites that she might be exposed to because they can't fight off every disease that's out there. And she never has to worry about predators. She doesn't have to worry about getting hit by a car or being shot by somebody that doesn't understand just how beneficial her species is. And so because of that, she could actually live more than twice as long with us than she ever could in the wild. So Suli, having only been 10 years old this summer, we're hoping that we're going to have her around well after I retire many years from now. All right, so before she gets too incredibly bored again, we're going to start answering questions for you. And Megan, our chat wrangler, has been collecting those, so she's going to start throwing those at me now.
All right, Jimmy wants to know, I thought turkey vultures were found year-round in Wyoming, but I recently read they are only here in the spring and summer. Which is true?
So Jimmy asks, what is true? Are turkey vultures in Wyoming year-round, or are they only here in the summer? And here in Wyoming, they are only here in the summer. This is a pretty migratory bird across most of their range, but not all of their range. And it's one of the things that I've learned in 20 years of loving vultures is that they always surprise you. So I learned in the beginning that these guys have to go south for the winter because all of the carcasses are covered up. They can't find it in the snow anyway. It's just too cold. But reality is, on the East Coast, as far as New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you can find them year round. But our birds here in Wyoming do head south. I can speak for our Cody population. They usually appear around the first weekend in April, and they've been here for 1 week now. LaDon spotted them last week for the first time. And then they're gonna head south probably at the beginning of October. So in Wyoming, they are just a summer bird.
Okay, so Christy, this comes from Facebook Live. She wants to know, do they only lay one egg at a time?
Do turkey vultures only lay one egg at a time? Most years, turkey vultures will actually lay 2 eggs. Hopefully both of them will make it to being adults. There are some of the bigger birds that will only lay 1 egg. In fact, California condors typically lay 1 egg every other year. So turkey vultures do a little better. Most of the time it's going to be 2 eggs.
Okay, I'm gonna flip over to YouTube Live now. Is her acidic saliva irritating to humans?
Oh, is her acidic saliva irritating to human skin? I'm kind of embarrassed that I can actually answer this because I really shouldn't ever have turkey vulture saliva on me. Yeah, thank you. I've never noticed any kind of burning sensation or anything. And most of the time we don't get too much saliva. Suli doesn't usually interact with us a whole lot. She's pretty good for me, but she can be a little questionable because she's always trying to figure out her place in the human world. Most of the time it's not going to be her saliva. It's going to be the stomach acid itself that's going to be so acidic. But I have been told, I have not actually witnessed it, I have been told that their stomach acid, when they vomit, could actually take the paint off a car, or it could burn a hole in your clothing. Now, I have been vomited on by a vulture. I was smart enough to wipe it off before it could burn a hole through my clothes. But I've never actually noticed any kind of burning, but I think anyone who has smelled it will tell you it is about the worst smell you can imagine in the universe. It's awful.
Hey, I've been told that the California condors were reduced by DDT eggshell thinning. Were turkey vultures unaffected? Why have we not seen their population decline like the condor?
Excellent. So the question is, they've been told that California condors were heavily affected and that their population really declined because of a chemical called DDT making their eggshells thin. And they want to know if turkey vultures have been affected in the same way and why not. And while, yes, sometimes the California condors had a little bit of effect, but for the most part, scavengers weren't as affected by DDT. The #1 problem for California condors is lead poisoning. So because they're scavengers, they're eating animals that have been hit by cars, that have been shot and not recovered, either by hunters or poachers. So for the most part, they're being exposed to lead. And that's the #1 problem for the California condor. Now, the reason that scavengers like Suli aren't as likely to end up with DDT toxicity is because they're not at the very top of a food chain. So peregrine falcons, bald eagles, and osprey were all very heavily affected by DDT. And for peregrine falcons, they're bird eaters. And so what would happen is farmers or municipalities, anybody would spray DDT to try to kill insects. Well, other insects are going to eat the small insects or fish or small birds. And as they eat more and more, they get more and more of the DDT built up in their body. When a peregrine falcon comes along and they catch that bird and they eat it, they don't just eat the bird, they're also eating all the toxins inside the bird. And it can take a lot of birds to feed a peregrine falcon. So it's a process called biomagnification. The further up the food chain you are, the more likely you are to ingest those toxins and be affected. Turkey vultures are scavengers, so they're going to be eating things like deer or raccoons that are usually going to be eating plants that might not have been sprayed. So they were far less affected simply because of the kind of diet that they have, which is very, very lucky for them.
All right, one last question. How much do turkey vultures eat in a week?
Oh, how much do turkey vultures eat in a week? Well, it just kind of depends on the vulture. Suli, because she's not in the wild, she's not flying and expending a lot of energy, she doesn't eat nearly as much as a bird in the wild would do. So Suli gets about 1/4 pound of food a day. So in a week, Suli would probably be eating about, I would say, 3 to 3.5 pounds of food. In the summer, we cut that back because you don't need as much energy to try to survive the winter, even though she's in a heated space during the winter. She loves to be out in the sunshine, and she just doesn't need as much food in the summer. So that's about how much she would eat. In the wild, I would expect a lot of these birds would need 30 to 50% more food than our birds actually get. And one thing that I think is incredibly amazing about turkey vultures is they can actually go up to 2 weeks without eating, and they'll still be okay. I would probably, at least in my head, I would assume I was dying if I went 2 days without eating. But in the wild, life is much, much harder. Part of the reason that they do spend so much time flying and cover so much ground is that they're trying to find something to eat. So it's not always easy. You may not even get as much food as Suli gets. Our birds are probably a little bit fatter than most birds that you would find in the wild because they are lucky enough to get food every day. They don't have to worry about parasites and things like that. But yeah, I would say probably in the wild, you would probably be eating 4 pounds at least a week just to survive. But that's kind of a guess based on what she eats. And it sounds like that is all of the questions that we have out there. So I'm going to turn it back to Chris here in a second. And you guys, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope that you learned a lot about turkey vultures, and I hope that you have a whole new appreciation for these really, really cool birds.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That was a great presentation, and thank you for taking the time to show us Suli. I do want to mention that we did another one of these last year Expo as well, and it was with Remington and Owl. So for the folks who feel like they really missed out and didn't get their bird on screen, they can go back and watch that, and I'll put that in the chat here shortly. But once again, thank you for sharing all these interesting facts, and this will be available later for anyone who missed part of it and wants to catch up and get all the great info. Also, I shared a link earlier in the chat, and I'll share it again, but we have 13 events for our Wyoming Outdoor Expo. They'll all be live, so no matter where you are, you can tune in and catch those and hopefully enjoy. But thank you so much for joining us, and take care.